Hello, Internet. I am Jackie Fox, and today we're going to be talking about a concept that I came up with in late 2020 for a book set in that time, but also, maybe more interestingly, how I'm choosing to start to write it, which is new for me and I think might be pretty interesting for some of you because I'm trying to push ChatGPT to at least give me kind of roughly a rough draft of it, and I'm also kind of testing the limitations of what it can and cannot do. It's kind of an experiment in asking the question, can I get ChatGPT to write a book? And not to spoil it too much, but the answer is pretty solidly no. Although it can do a lot more than you probably think it can, and with what it can do now, if it were to become more advanced, new iterations might actually be able to answer that question with a yes. One of the things that that's going to depend upon, and one of the things that I don't necessarily have that might make it more possible now, but I still say that the answer is no, is the fact that there is kind of almost like a coding language, like a formulaic way that you write prompts for these things. This was also very true of Stable Diffusion as well. But it is just as true of ChatGPT, and it is possible that I could get better results by changing my methods or changing just the way that I word prompts or the way that I write prompts using different keywords, learning more about that formula and how to manipulate it. I might be able to get better results, but I still don't think that it would be able to write a book. And it certainly isn't going to write a book in the kind of point and click way that maybe some people are imagining, where you just give it an idea and it writes an entire novel for you. And part of that actually could be the limitations of the free version. I'm sure there's some sort of a character limit, and like there might be some version of this where there isn't a character limit, where you could tell it to write a 50,000 word novella and it just fucking does it. But that's definitely not the way that this is going to work at all. But before we get into some of the brass tacks technical aspects and ways to kind of try to use this as more of a muse or kind of an outline planner or stuff like that, let's get into the concept first. So it was probably pretty late 2020. I want to say like right around the election. I was noticing this kind of odd phenomenon that right now there were more people watching streaming services than ever, and yet in all of these streaming offerings, despite the fact that our world had been redefined 8 months earlier and we were still in the thick of a pandemic that was life-changing, there weren't even subtle references to it. The only one that I can think of during that time really was, other than things that we're talking about current events, of course, was the Uncanny Counter out of Korea, which never referenced the pandemic directly, but when they were kind of doing covert stuff and they had to mask up, they wore cloth pandemic masks, which was kind of iconic. Like, I'm sure that this could have worked prior to that and not had any connotation. But since this released at that time, it gave them a different connotation. And this may not have been intended, and probably one of the big reasons why none of this stuff had really filtered into the streaming services and shows that we were watching at that time was because the pandemic was really disruptive to filming anyways. So, during that first year, they were still rushing to finish filming on the things that they had started in 2019. So new ideas, new stories, and new ways of telling them really hadn't filtered into these things. I mean, there was always the chance that they could do some last minute changes and references and nods during the filming process, but still, it was a bit too early for that from that perspective, but also a bit too early because it was definitely a sensitive topic for America at the time. Like, the social media at that time was kind of devolving into people yelling at each other about the pandemic. And in the meantime, the streets of America, the places that we expect to see human life, I mean, we don't really have necessarily gathering places at watering holes the same way we used to, at least other than bars, and those were at least half closed during many parts of the pandemic, or like had a curfew or something like that. But all of the less official places, like the commercial spaces that don't really serve as good watering holes because they've been ruined by capitalism, but even those places were more and more empty and abandoned, and it could lead you to a very strange, surreal feeling of being suddenly very small and alone in the world and isolated and lonely. And a lot of people dealt with that during that time, especially those people who were laid off from work. And, even though there weren't like lockdowns, like you were forced to stay home, there were times when it was heavily suggested to stay home as much as you possibly could. But for these people, they really, there wasn't anything going on in the world for them to go out and do necessarily other than work, and now they didn't have that. So those people ended up with cabin fever the worst, I would imagine, were the people who were already working from home during that period. So I'm thinking about all of these things, and I'm thinking about how, there's a lot of powerful emotions here. There's a lot of powerful concepts here. There's a lot of things that would definitely reach people, especially after they've had some time to put some emotional distance between themselves and the pandemic. So I started asking myself, like, what kind of story would I write to capitalize on the setting? And one of the ideas that I had was to kind of set it in the same universe as the other books that I've written, which are mainly kind of a fantasy series, but to take kind of the other perspective, to take the elements of specifically the Mindscape series, which introduces a VR headset that can kind of project a VR experience into your mind, and even in some cases procedurally generate a VR experience based on your thoughts and feelings and kind of connections like that. But there's a point later on in that series, which, and the series itself is mainly focused on what happens inside of those virtual worlds. But there's a point in the final part of that trilogy where there is kind of some corporate espionage going on. Their headset has kind of been leaked, or at least information about the design has been pilfered, and is being used by an American company to create not a competing product, but a similar product, one that allows the user to wear it while they're sleeping and record and replay and even re-experience in that full immersive virtual world their dreams. And there was a point where this technology is used to kind of manipulate one of the characters that works at the company while they're at like a tech convention or something. And it establishes that this technology, this use case, would have, if used unscrupulously, the ability to influence people in some fairly uncomfortable ways. And even more than, I think that kind of one of the ethoses, one of the meta narratives of the previous series was the idea that, AI technology was a thing that could get out of hand, and that while we generally compartmentalize it into something that exists within a computer, there are ways, metaphorically, that it could reach outside of the computer and have very real and direct impacts on the world, even changing it or destroying it or turning it into something new. And that those it was kind of a hyperbole about that, in kind of the same way that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, that character and the arc there is kind of the monster of science, or the monstrous possibilities that science used recklessly and perhaps unethically could produce. And there is, in certain points, kind of an examination of the ethical use of that and all of that. But that is, honestly, in that series, it's in there. It's definitely an undercurrent that informs the entire story. It's a thing that from the first pages of the first book, you can't necessarily look away from. But it's not also overstated. It is just kind of that background hum of, this is kind of the point of this story in a way. So I was thinking about how I could kind of take that and expand it and really examine it with a story in a slightly different way, but not one that is as fearful as of the AI, but one that takes a new technology that seems amazing and wonderful and truly life-changing in some ways, takes that and then demonstrates that alongside that, what would happen in a capitalist system with that technology? I mean, it has to make money somehow. And the most effective things at making money are those, especially in the tech space, that we don't see how they make their money, that is obfuscated or made opaque to us. Kind of like the way Facebook was before it became really commonly known that Facebook was selling our data to advertisers, and that was how they were making their money. We didn't know that at a time, and we thought, wow, we're getting this amazing service completely free. Oh my God. And people kept worrying. We all remember those viral memes about people who were like, I'm posting this to say that Facebook can never raise their prices and whatever. Those weird chain emails about Facebook starting to charge $10 a month or something. But then once we all realized how Facebook is actually making money, that kind of idea became absurd. And how we aren't actually very good at examining the ways that these free services actually monetize us to the system of capitalism. So that was the story. That was kind of the drumbeat of the story that I wanted to write. And I wanted to make it more about big data, which is becoming a very timely issue. I mean, I was writing about the dangers of AI in a time before we had the kind of AIs that we have now, kind of the AIs that I'm talking about in this video, and utilizing in this video. So that was a bit prescient. But, the conversation about big tech, while I am within the story pushing it into a realm that is meant to be kind of a Black Mirror exaggeration of current scenario, it is pretty timely to talk about big tech and big data right now. So with all of that being in mind, I had a rough idea, but I really didn't necessarily know how to flesh it out. I wasn't sure what the connective tissue, the daily life, the patterns and intricacies of the main character, etc. would be. But my idea was to write the story of a woman who had lost a job in the hospitality industry, and she had a couple months left on her lease, and she had a little bit of money saved up, but it wouldn't be enough to write out the lease. And even if she could make up that difference, she would be completely broke and looking for a new apartment, have to pay a deposit, all of that. It would really put her in an impossible situation. But at the same time, even doing the job search, like, this was a period of time where lines at unemployment offices were backing up like around the block, where there were massive delays in the processing of applications in the unemployment areas of many states, just because there were so many more of them than they had ever expected to see at one time. So this is a really desperate place, and this also happens in a period of time before we started doing things like eviction protection, kind of forestalling the eviction process for people who had been affected by the pandemic, which certainly would be a benefit to our main character. So, in some sort of fashion, I hadn't really devised how she would get in touch with a mysterious tech company that doesn't really sell any products and doesn't have any connections or anything that she can really research except to know that it exists. And they reach out to her, or she reaches out to them or something, sees an ad, who knows. And she gets the opportunity to test this product that records her dreams, and then she has to review her dreams and kind of write a bit of a dream journal about how the experience made her feel, how the experience worked, kind of like an in-depth review of her dreams and how they were presented to her and how accurate she felt they were, how meaningful they were to her, what they said to her, etc. like that. Turn that in, make some money. That's the process. And I knew that there should be a big twist, and I figured like big data things would factor into this. I was tempted at a point to write in the idea of something slipping out of her dream world into the real world, or because that seemed a little bit there's precedent for it in the series of things escaping digital worlds, but after thinking about it, I was like, you know what? I don't want to go that route with this. That makes this a little bit more fantasy. Let's make it more topical and realistic and cultural. So I kind of thought that, maybe this could be a manifestation of cabin fever. Maybe she could believe that her dreams are coming true and walking around the streets, but it was really just her lonely mind projecting familiar faces into the distance. That kind of thing. And I still haven't quite worked that concept into this story yet, but it is something that I do want to explore as part of the minutia of the story. Maybe not necessarily like a plot that I even put on the outline yet so far, but definitely something that I'm thinking about. But I started thinking about, like, the precedent, the kind of seed story that exists in the third book of that trilogy towards the end of the series, about one of the characters using the dream headset. And the idea that I got from that is that, what if this was subtly used to manipulate people? What if it was subtly being used to manipulate very large amounts of people? And how would it most likely be used to manipulate people? I mean, for one, there's a lot of really over conspiratorial, like, wild ways that you could go with this. It could be someone trying to take over the world or something dramatic. But I'm also thinking I should avoid those kind of over glorified temptations, because especially during the pandemic, and when I stumbled onto this idea, I thought it was perfect. But what if they were putting advertising into her dreams? And specifically, what if it was the local businesses around her that were advertising to her, the ones that were struggling to keep people coming in the door during the pandemic? What if they got so desperate that they reached out to a tech company to advertise without even really understanding how that company was going to do it? Just that they would do it for them for a really simple and easy trade-off for them to pay. So that kind of being the deal with the devil, that they agree to advertise to people in their dreams in order to help their failing businesses. So with all of that in mind, let's actually talk about how I used ChatGPT. Okay, so here's how I start. Here's my prompt. Outline of a book about a woman who loses her job in early 2020 in a world still coming to grips with the pandemic. Looking to meet people, she joins a local gym. She's surprised it's still open and ends up learning about an opportunity to test a headset that records streams from her home. Pretty simple. That is 2 sentences, and I get this. 1. Introduction. Introduce main character and her background. Set A. The scene of the world still dealing with the pandemic and the loss of her job. Describe how the character becomes interested in joining the local gym. 2. The gym. Describe the character's experience at the gym and how she meets new people. Explore the character's initial reluctance to join the gym during the pandemic and how she overcomes her fears. Introduce the character's trainer, and their relationship. 3. The dream headset. Describe the character's curiosity about the dream headset and how she learns about the opportunity to test it. Explore the character's skepticism about the validity of the headset and her concerns about the potential risks. Describe the character's decision to participate in testing and her experience using the headset. 4. Dreams. Describe the character's dreams and how they change over the course of testing. Explore the character's reactions to the dreams and how they impact her understanding of herself and her life. Describe the character's reflection on the meaning of the dreams and how they influence her outlook on the future. 5. Conclusion. Summarize the character's experience with the dream headset and how it has impacted her life. Reflect on the significance of the character's journey and how it relates to the larger themes of the book. I got that off of 2 sentences, and you've heard me describe the story I want to write already, and it's not this. But this actually gives me a little bit of a framework. I mean, look, I could have written this outline myself, but the fact of the matter is, I put 2 sentences into this thing and it wrote me this outline. So I then respond, her dreams begin to yield strange clues that end up leading to other local businesses still open and struggling. To which it replies with 6 on the outline. The local businesses. Describe how the character's dreams begin to include clues about local businesses. Explore the character's curiosity about these businesses and her desire to help them in any way she can. Describe the character's visits to the businesses and the impacts that they have on her. Reflect on the significance of the character's connection to these local businesses and how they reflect her own struggles and resilience in the face of the pandemic. Okay, that's really interesting. I'm getting 4 lines of dialogue, not dialogue, 4 lines of outline here and its own little heading and section, off of 1 line. Pretty cool. So let's keep going and kind of write some conclusion. Here's my prompt. One thing ties the businesses together. All of them have the same business cards that she had been given in the gym. She begins to feel concerned that these aberrant dreams may in fact be ads, and goes back to the gym to talk to her inside man about the person who had left the cards. To which he replies, 7. The mystery deepens. Describe the character's realization that the local businesses all have the same business cards, and that her concern that the dreams may be ads. Explore the character's decision to return to the gym to talk to her trainer about the mysterious business cards. Describe the character's conversation with the trainer and any new information she learns about the person who left the cards. Introduce the possibility that there may be more to the dream headset and the local businesses than meets the eye. 8. Uncovering the truth. Describe the character's efforts to uncover the truth about the dream headset and local businesses. Explore the character's determination to get to the bottom of the mystery despite the potential risks. Describe the character's confrontation with the person behind the business cards and the revelations she learns. Reflect on the character's journey and how it has helped her find purpose and meaning in the midst of the pandemic. So then I asked it to write a 10,000 word novella based on 1 through 8 of the outline. And, well, kind of mixed results, but let me read, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 paragraphs. Definitely not 10,000 words, and possibly due to the limitations, but it did actually get through the entire story. So this is basically the story summarized and built out according to ChatGPT. And this is honestly probably the closest thing you're going to get to answering the question of, can ChatGPT write a novel? Because, and there's one thing that I've mentioned in a previous AI video, is about how a lot of these things can have instances, and those instances have their own kind of supplementary data, a memory of what has been said in that conversation that is unique to that instance. And I can start new chats, and each new chat is a new instance. So basically, I have seeded this chat with the entirety of the outline of the book at this point, because I have made it come up with it. So now I have that point that exists within kind of the memory of this conversation that I can reference. So that's why, based on 1 through 8 of the outline, actually works in this prompt to produce basically a book summary. So let me read that out to you. You can see kind of some of the issues with the writing. As the world struggled to come to grips with the pandemic, Mary had lost her job and found herself feeling adrift and alone. Desperate to find some sense of community and purpose, she decides to join a local gym that was still open despite the pandemic. At first, Mary was nervous about being in such close proximity to other people, but she quickly found that the gym was a welcoming place full of friendly faces. Her trainer, Tom, was especially kind and patient. She found herself looking forward to their sessions together. One day, Tom mentioned to Mary that he'd heard about a new device called a dream headset, which was supposed to be able to record and analyze dreams. Mary was intrigued by the idea and asked if there was any way she could try it out. To her surprise, Tom told her that he knew someone who was looking for testers and that he could put a good word in for her. Mary wasn't sure what to make of the dream headset at first. She had always been skeptical of newfangled gadgets, but this one seemed too good to be true. But as she thought about it more, she realized that she had nothing to lose by giving it a try. And so she agreed to be a tester, and Tom set up everything for her to receive the headset and start the testing process. As Mary began using the headset, she was amazed by the vividness and detail of her dreams. She had always been a vivid dreamer, but these dreams were on a whole different level. They almost felt real, and she found herself thinking about them long after she woke up. As she continued testing the headset, Mary started to notice something strange. Some of the dreams seemed to contain clues about local businesses that were open and struggling in the midst of the pandemic. She wasn't sure what to make of it, but she felt a strong desire to visit these businesses and see if she could help them in any way that she could. As Mary explored the local businesses, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to these dreams than just coincidences. All of the businesses had the same business cards with a mysterious logo, and she had a sneaking suspicion that they were all connected in some way. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Mary returned to the gym and asked Tom if he knew anything about the business cards or the person who had left them. Tom seemed hesitant at first, but eventually he admitted that he had heard some rumors about a mysterious figure who was using the dream headset to advertise to people in their dreams. Mary couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had always suspected that there was something off about the dream headset, but she had never imagined that it could be used to manipulate people's dreams for advertising purposes. She knew she had to do something to stop it. With Tom's help, Mary tracked down the person behind the business cards and confronted them about their nefarious plan. The person was smug at first, but Mary pressed them and eventually broke down and admitted that they had been using the dream headset to advertise to people in their dreams. Mary was shocked and angry, but she also felt a sense of satisfaction that she'd been able to uncover the truth and put a stop to the unethical use of the dream headset. As she left the person's office, she felt a renewed sense of purpose and determination. The pandemic may have thrown her life off course, but she had found a way to make a difference and fight back against injustice. Okay. So, if it weren't for the fact that would spoil the book, I could see that, or at least portions of this, being like what would be on the back cover of a book as a description. Because, like, I would not read a novel that was written like this. And in fact, this reminds me very, very heavily of my first college creative writing class and the other students in that class. The ones that, like, didn't already have an aptitude for writing or creative writing, they wrote like this. To where it's like, it's maybe how you would tell a story to a friend, you know, like recapping something that happened to you at work, instead of writing a scene. You know, there are no scenes in here, it's just description. Arguably, it definitely fleshes out in a lot of ways. Like, it chooses names, it kind of invents storylines and then follows them through. Like, I didn't, at this point, have anything about a trainer being in here, and I didn't, the trainer wasn't necessarily involved in the mystery or didn't become a character because they didn't even really intend for them to be there. I definitely didn't intend for her to have a trainer because that implies that she had to pay, and then, like, well, she's supposed to be broke, so why is she paying to have a trainer? It just kind of, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and that really wasn't, I guess, what ChatGPT was thinking. But you can also see that it does, as far as, like, if this were an essay about the book that I wanted to write, I would probably give it an A. Well, I wouldn't give it an A. I would maybe give it a B-, right? Like, it's work. It definitely kind of describes the idea that I'm trying to do, but it is, well, first of all, it's definitely not 10,000 words. It's also definitely not a novella, but this kind of shows, like, where I think the aptitude is at. But also, admittedly, I gave it a lot to process to build that. So the next thing I tried to do, and I'll read the first one to you: write a highly detailed 1,000 word chapter based on one from the outline. And here's what I got from that. As the world struggled to come to grips with the pandemic, Mary felt herself feeling adrift and alone. So, while it is still writing from the initial outline, which doesn't have character names in it, because the data of the last message is kind of in the background data for this instance, it's going to start pulling and fleshing out the outline, which is very generic and non-specific, with some of the specifics from what I'm just going to call, like, the story summary. So here we are. As the world struggled to come to grips with the pandemic, Mary found herself feeling adrift and alone. She had always been a hard worker, but when her job was one of the many casualties of the economic downturn, she felt like she had lost a part of herself. She spent her days staring at the ceiling, wondering what she was supposed to do with her life. One day, she decided that she had had enough. She was tired of feeling sorry for herself, and she was determined to find some sense of purpose and community. So she packed up her bag and headed to the local gym. At first, Mary was nervous about being in such close proximity to other people. She'd heard all the stories about how easy it was to catch the virus, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to take the risk. But as she walked through the open doors of the gym, she was greeted by a friendly receptionist who assured her that they were taking all of the necessary precautions to keep everyone safe. Which, actually, I like this paragraph, and I think I might work some ideas from this into the story, rereading it, because I do have her feeling fairly apprehensive, but there's no one who really diffuses that in the gym. She just kind of walks in and feels comfortable, and I think it would make more sense if there was a diffusion of that, perhaps. Anyways, feeling a bit more at ease, Mary signed up for a gym membership and was introduced to her trainer, Tom. Tom was a tall, muscular man with a kind smile and a reassuring presence. He showed Mary around the gym and explained all the different machines and workouts she could try. As they walked, Tom asked Mary about herself and why she had decided to join the gym. Mary hesitated for a moment, not sure if she was ready to share her story with a stranger. But something about Tom's open and friendly demeanor made her feel comfortable, and she found herself telling him about her job loss and her struggles with the pandemic. To Mary's surprise, Tom nodded sympathetically and told her that he understood exactly how she was feeling. He had gone through something similar a few years ago, and he knew firsthand how hard it could be to find your footing again. But he reassured Mary that the gym was a place where she could find support and community, and he offered to be her trainer and guide as she worked on getting back on track. Mary was touched by Tom's kindness, and she felt a surge of hope and determination. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to take on the challenge. She shook Tom's hand and smiled, grateful for the chance to start anew. It's not terrible. There are definitely parts of this that would work, but again, it's a little the big problem that I have with this still is that it is show not tell. And again, this condensation of what would be good narrative writing is kind of the problem here, in that it is trying to find the path of least resistance between each of the points on that line, on the outline. So it's trying to cover a lot of ground very quickly, which is forcing it into kind of a writing style that is more show than tell. That being said, there is a lot more show in this than tell. So what I did from there was basically repeated the same prompt, but changed the number that it was related to on the outline. And I was actually pretty impressed that it was able to keep track of what each number on the outline meant. This was a really consistent command, given that I had already established an outline in the memory of the conversation. So from there, there were a couple of things that actually came from reading these chapters, or pseudo chapters. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They're all around 8 or 10 paragraphs. They're not terribly long. But there were a lot of ideas that just in how it connected the dots, using that kind of somewhat rushed, but also a little bit fleshed out way, it actually built up some things that I hadn't necessarily thought about. Like the idea that Mary would team up with Tom in order to try to solve the mystery. And, because I'd kind of imagined her, at least for most of the story, doing this alone. Because I wanted the feelings of loneliness and isolation to kind of filter through. But at the same time, this actually works pretty well. And there's a lot of other little subplots and types of things that this kind of works in. But I ended up going to another instance because I wanted to clear that temporary memory that we were talking about before. So I created a new instance. And what I did was I took the outline that the previous chat had given me, and I put in the command, write a story based on this outline, quotation marks, pasted in the whole outline in quotation marks, just to see what it would do. And once again, it kind of gave me a new kind of story description type thing. It didn't work much better than it did in the previous chat. The difference here is that before inputting the outline that had been written by ChatGPT previously, I fleshed in a bunch of details. So, for instance, let me read you part 1, the introduction. Introduce main character June and her background. Now she has a name. Set the scene of the world still dealing with the pandemic and her loss of a job at the restaurant within the hotel, the Grand. Describe the anxious relationship between June and a world that now seemed eerily empty because of the pandemic, and the loneliness that builds as she looks for a new job to pay the rent online, but finds nothing promising in the area. Describe how the character becomes interested in joining the local gym, where she's shown around by an employee named Melvin on crutches who can't afford to go to the doctor despite his full-time employment. Employee mentions to her that he's looking for other ways to make money, and June mentions that she's lost her job recently. So I took kind of the bare bones shit that ChatGPT gave me. I filled in a lot of the details from the first couple pages that I'd already written, like the character's name, the name of, the name and description of the job that she'd lost, naming and kind of giving a bit of a American healthcare system twist to the story with kind of I think it's funny to think of like a health club employee that isn't taking good care of their health, because honestly it happens way more than you would think as a person who has worked in health clubs before. But especially for the for the members, they were always kind of like, if you weren't fit in whatever way, if you were somehow out of shape, sometimes the members would kind of judge some of the employees for that. Like, you work in a gym, why are you so overweight? That kind of thing. It's shitty, but it happens. So this, I don't want it to be an indictment of Melvin. I don't want Melvin to be kind of seen by the audience as an idiot for not going to the doctor. I want him to be a sympathetic character. Anyways, I added all of that detail in, and I wanted to see how it changed the result that I got. So this is the result with a more fleshed out outline, where Mary, I guess previously, is now June. June had always been a hardworking and ambitious person, but the pandemic had thrown a wrench in her plans. She'd been working at a restaurant within the luxurious hotel, the Grand, but when the pandemic hit, the hotel was forced to close and June lost her job. As she searched for a new job online, June couldn't help but feel anxious and alone in a world that seemed eerily empty. She spent her days staring at the computer screen, scrolling through job listings and sending out resumes, but nothing seemed promising in her area. One day, as she walked through the neighborhood, June noticed a local gym with a sign out front advertising special pandemic rates. She'd always been hesitant to join a gym during the pandemic, but the thought of working out and possibly meeting new people was too tempting to resist. As she stepped inside, a man on crutches named Melvin showed her around. He worked at the gym full-time, but he couldn't afford to go to the doctor for his injury. As they chatted, June mentioned that she had recently lost her job and was looking for any new way to make money. Melvin mentioned that he was in the same book and looking for other opportunities as well. At the front counter, Melvin passes June a business card for a company offering money for product testing a new tech product called the Dream headset. June was immediately intrigued and asked Melvin more about it, but he didn't know much beyond what was written on the card. Despite her initial skepticism, June decided to give the headset a try. She was assigned a trainer who helped her get started, and they quickly developed a close relationship. As she worked out and used the headset, June began to have vivid and strange dreams that seemed to be connected to local businesses in the area. At first, June wasn't sure what to make of the dreams and their significance, but as she continued to use the headsets and the dreams became more frequent and vivid, she couldn't ignore the clues that they seemed to be offering. She became curious about the local businesses and wanted to help them in any way she could. As she visited each business and learned more about them, June was struck by their resilience and determination to survive in the face of a pandemic. She found herself drawn into their stories and felt a deep connection to them. But as the dreams continued, June began to have doubts about their authenticity. She noticed that all of the local businesses had the same business card and began to wonder if her dreams were simply ads. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, June returned to the gym and asked her trainer about the business cards. Her trainer revealed that the person who had left the cards was a mysterious and elusive figure that seemed to have a lot of influence in the local community. June was even more determined to uncover the truth and began to investigate further. As she dug deeper, June realized that there was more to the dream headset in the local businesses that met the eye. She began to suspect that the person behind the business cards was using the headset to manipulate people's dreams and influence their decisions. Despite the potential risks, June was determined to get to the bottom of the mystery. She confronted the person behind the business cards and was shocked by the revelation she learned. In the end, June's journey within the dream headset had helped her find purpose and meaning in the midst of the pandemic. She discovered a new sense of community and connection, and had learned to trust her instincts and judgment. And though the pandemic was still ongoing, June felt more hopeful and resilient than ever. Another thing that I tried with this was taking some of the parts that I'd already written, or maybe, kind of what I had written up to a point where I had momentary writer's block, and I'd plug it in and kind of tell it to continue writing that part. And sometimes that would provide interesting results. So I wrote up to the point that she finds herself at the gym. And I took about 5 paragraphs before the point that she's walking up to it and tell it to continue that according to I on the outline. And what I got from that was this, which is a little bit more of a scene. It's a little bit better, but it's still not quite great. As she stood in front of the gym, June couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness that had been gnawing at her for weeks. The pandemic had left her feeling isolated and disconnected from the world, and the loss of her job had only added to the sense of uncertainty. But as she looked through the plate glass windows, she saw people moving and laughing, working out and enjoying themselves. It was the first time she'd seen anything like it in weeks, and it was a welcome sight. Despite her initial hesitation, June pushed open the door and stepped inside. The gym was smaller than she expected, but it was bursting with activity. She was greeted by an employee on crutches named Melvin, who offered to give her a tour of the facilities. As they walked through the gym, June couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. She'd always been hesitant to join a gym, but the pandemic had made her realize the importance of taking care of herself and her mental health. As they chatted, Melvin mentioned that he was looking for ways to make extra money, and June shared that she had recently lost her job. Melvin pulled out a business card from the front counter and handed it to June. It was for a company offering money for product testing a new tech product called the Dream Headset. June was intrigued, but also skeptical. She wasn't sure if she believed in the power of dreams or if the headset was even safe. But as she thought more about it, she realized that she had nothing to lose. She was desperate for a way to make money, and the thought of experiencing new and exciting dreams was too tempting to resist. So, with a sense of nervous excitement, June decided to give the Dream Headset a try. She was assigned a trainer and began to work out and use the headset regularly. As she used the headset, June's dreams began to change. They became more vivid and strange, and she found herself reflecting on the meaning and significance. She began to see clues about local businesses in the area and became curious about their stories and struggles. Despite her initial skepticism, June found herself drawn to local businesses and wanted to help them in any way she could. She was touched. She visited each one and was touched by their resilience and determination to survive in the face of the pandemic. And look, there's 3 more paragraphs, but from here it basically summarizes the rest of the story. So one of the issues that it had here, the first 7 paragraphs are actually from part 1 on the outline. And then, when it finished part 1, it just did the next 5 paragraphs that were, the other parts of the outline speedrun. So that was kind of odd. But at least the first half of this is actually kind of decent. Like, you could fill in some minutia and some detail here, but a lot of the exposition is actually good. It moves too fast and doesn't linger on certain things or expound upon certain things in the way that I would want it to. But this is actually getting a bit better and a bit closer to being usable. So that's kind of another way that you can use it. Another one, I took one of the sections that it gave me that was in past tense, and I did the command make quotation marks that passage, quotation marks, present tense. And it worked. I mean, I won't read you the prompt because it's going to be basically the same, but June hesitates before entering the fitness palace, but the pandemic has made her realize the importance of taking care of herself. She takes a deep breath and walks through the doors, greeted by the sound of pounding footsteps and the hum of treadmills. She sees a group of people working out on the machines, their faces focused and determined. Despite her initial reluctance, June hops on a treadmill and starts to run. She feels the burn in her muscles as she pushes herself harder and harder. As the minutes tick by, she starts to feel a sense of accomplishment. She's making progress and feeling more confident in her own strength. But despite her growing confidence, June struggles to wake up early enough to join the same group of people on the treadmills. She's always been a night owl, but the thought of getting up before dawn is a daunting prospect. As she makes her way to the gym one morning, she sees a familiar face waiting for her on the treadmill. It is Rachel, her trainer, who has offered to help her for free since she wants to do something in the quiet mornings since the pandemic started. June is grateful for Rachel's help, and she looks forward to their morning workouts. As they begin to run and lift weights together, June starts to feel a sense of camaraderie and connection that she'd been missing since the pandemic hit. But as they work out together, Rachel hands June a business card from the front counter of the gym, offering money for product testing a new product. June is intrigued, but also skeptical. She isn't sure if she believes in the power of dreams or if the product is even safe. But as she thinks about it more, she realizes that she has nothing to lose. She is desperate for a way to make money, and the thought of experiencing new and exciting dreams is too tempting to resist. So, this is really familiar territory. This is kind of a section of the book that I have hit a number of times. And by this part of the instance, and this is actually the last thing I made in this instance, and, you know, this actually might be interesting to continue working in. But I think the reason that I stopped working in it is because at this point I had added a number of different things to the outline, such as naming the trainer Rachel, and there were various pieces of information that started to conflict with the outline that I had basically seeded this with. So with that issue, I decided that it would probably be best to start a new instance and enter into that an updated outline. So I moved on to a new instance, and instead of starting with an outline, I wanted to see what would happen if I plugged in the first couple of pages that I'd written and just told it to continue it. And it was okay, but the problem that I ran into here was that this instance, because I didn't seed it with an outline first, it just kind of tries to find the path of least resistance from what I've written to an ending. So let me read the first couple, basically responses to the first couple pages that I uploaded. June sighs and closes her eyes, letting out a deep breath. It was also overwhelming, the thought of starting over, trying to find a new job in a world that seemed to be falling apart. She'd always been a hard worker, but it seemed like no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't catch a break. The world was changing and she was being left behind. But she couldn't just give up. She had to keep going, to find a way to make things work. She couldn't let herself get consumed by this feeling of loneliness and despair. With a new sense of determination, June sits up and opens her eyes, ready to take on whatever challenges might come her way. She may not know what the future holds, but she knows she will have the strength and drive to face it head on. Which is something I've noticed whenever you're trying to to feed ChatGPT any sort of assignment in creative fiction, ChatGPT really likes happy endings. Like, uplifting, inspiring, happy endings. It'll write them into everything. So from there, I just told it to continue. Like, keep going. Very simple command. Just continue. June stands up and walks over to her laptop, determined to start looking for a new job. She knows it won't be easy, but she can't just sit around and do nothing. She opens up a job search website and begins scrolling through available positions. There are a few options in the hospitality industry, but she knows it will be competitive and she may not have the necessary experience for some of the other jobs. Despite the uncertainty, June remains determined. She updates her resume and begins applying for jobs, reaching out to old coworkers and friends to see if they know of any openings. It's a slow process, but she knows she has to keep going. As the days go by, June finds herself getting more and more discouraged. It seems like every job she applies for either goes to someone else or simply disappears. She starts to wonder if she'll ever be able to find something that will allow her to pay her rent and get back on her feet. But she refuses to give up. She knows that she has to keep trying, no matter how difficult it may seem. And eventually, her persistence pays off. She lands an interview at a local restaurant, and despite her nerves, she nails it. The manager offers her the job on the spot, and June can hardly believe it. She's finally getting a break. Over the next few weeks, June works hard at her new job, learning the ropes and making a good impression on coworkers and customers. She starts to feel like she's finally getting back on track, like she's finally found her footing in this strange world. And as she looks out the window at a busy street, she can't help but feel a sense of hope and optimism for the future. She knows she has a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, she feels like she's moving in the right direction. Which, like, fucking A, look, we're like 3 pages into this story, and you've already given me, like, the perfect happy ending that diffuses the rest of the plot. Like, if she could get another job, she probably wouldn't be calling a number on a business card that she got at the gym about a tech company that she can't figure out if it's real or not. You know what I mean? And this was the problem with this approach of just having it blindly kind of continue what I'd already written. Sometimes it would pick up, and this is without an outline. Like, it doesn't have an outline, just knows the first couple pages of the book, and it's working from that. So it is actually doing a pretty good job of following up on the ethos and vibe. But since it doesn't know what comes next, it tries to write a happy ending. So I eventually bailed on this one after trying to get it to continue some of the other things that I'd written. And the other thing is, so I took another section of the book a little bit later on, maybe like a page later, right? And I plugged it in and had it continue, and it gives me, as June walks down the empty street, she can't help but feel a sense of peace and solitude. This is supposed to be the scene where she's walking to the gym, still doesn't have a job, tired of looking, etc., desperate for anything. But it continues, it's nice to be out of the stuffy apartment and away from the constant buzzing of the computer and stress of job searching. She takes a deep breath and looks up at the clear, starry sky above her. It's moments like this that help her to feel grounded, and to remember that there is beauty in the world even when things seem tough. As she walks, June begins to think about all the things she's grateful for. She has a roof over her head, a job that allows her to pay her bills, a supportive group of friends and family. She knows that she's lucky to have these things, and she knows that she has to keep fighting to keep them. With a renewed sense of determination, June turns back towards her apartment, ready to face whatever challenges come her way. She knows the road ahead won't be easy, but she's ready to face it with strength and courage. She may not know what the future holds, but she knows she has the power to shape it for herself. And that, more than anything, gives her hope for the days ahead. So, while I was asking it to continue something that I was writing, it did that. It did continue writing that scene, but it also referenced back to the information that it had given me in the previous reply, where it wrote her a very quick happy ending. So, I realized that in order to really be able to do this, I was doing the right thing to begin with. I have to give this thing an outline so it knows what's coming next, so it knows not to write itself into a corner that doesn't allow it to transition into the next chapter. It knows that there's another chapter ahead, that it has to transition to that, so it doesn't, invalidate some of the later points. And in that respect, it actually does a pretty decent job of understanding kind of how to navigate a story in a very basic way, you can kind of keep a little bit continuity straight if you first give it that outline to start with. Although, I think it was this next instance. So I realized, look, I've absolutely got to start with an outline. So I ask it to write me a novel based on this outline, and I put in my final version of the story outline. At least I've written into every part of the initial outline that I've gotten. I've filled them out with facts, connections, relationships, twists, etc., relationships with time that it's being told in. And I asked it to write me a novel, and it instead wrote me an outline that was instead in paragraphs. And because the outline that I had given it didn't actually have any titles or headings, it actually gave me headings and broke things up actually in roughly the way that I would have wanted it to. And I think this is kind of ended up being the format roughly that I went with, because it gives me introduction, chapter 1, the gym, chapter 2, meeting Rachel, chapter 3, the tech company, chapter 4, testing the headset, chapter 5, the dreams, chapter 6, the fried chicken restaurant, interesting, chapter 7, local businesses, chapter 8, the treasure hunt, chapter 9, meaning of dreams, and then finally the conclusion. So it's writing roughly an 11 chapter deal here. So from here, now I have kind of this revised outline, and it's even broken up some of the areas. Like, I didn't expect the fried chicken restaurant to necessarily get its own chapter, but it makes sense because it is definitely a turning point in that it's like the first thing that suggests that maybe she's being cued to go to these places. So it actually makes sense to make it its own chapter. I think that was a good decision. And it breaks these down pretty well, and I would describe it, but fuck it. I also told it to continue just to see what it would do. But the other thing I want to say, and I think maybe I don't know, it did lose the plot around chapter 9 and the conclusion, because I had written in probably another 2 twists, another couple of chapters worth of stuff. But instead, after the treasure hunt, and she kind of the point where she starts to realize that something more is going on, that maybe something nefarious is happening, instead of all of those story beats, the last third of the story, it instead writes me the meaning of dreams, chapter 9, and a conclusion, which irons out any malfeasance and just has her continue going on with the program, and that has a happy, lovey-dovey ending about how learning about her dreams helped her learn about her life, right? Speed running happy endings when it isn't sure what else to do. So that wasn't quite right, but at least the first, 8 chapters make sense. So I had it continue just to see if it would use some of the stuff after that point and kind of incorporate some of the new stuff. And it came up with really interesting stuff there. The final dream, I think, is actually really interesting symbolically, and definitely something that I want to work into the book. But then there's something called the aftermath, which also kind of makes sense. And I did work on a little bit of it, and it does work into either the last chapter or the epilogue. But at the same time, again, this is kind of writing an ending where there's no confrontation with the company, which is not what I want. I want for my main character to stand up against big tech and big data. And they're just kind of speedrunning the conflict out of it in order to make it, I don't know, friendlier. So I start asking it to write longer versions of the chapters. And I realized one thing, that So what I start doing is giving it just a little bit more to work with in the prompt. Instead of just saying write a chapter based on chapter 3 of the outline, I was instead writing write a chapter based on chapter 3, which was its interpretation of my outline, and quotation marks, copy paste in my version of roughly that part of the story as an outline, so that it's both using its story beats and my story beats simultaneously, using them to kind of reinforce each other. I did this with chapter 3, which in their outline was the tech company, where she contacts the company, gets the headset, does a Zoom call, etc. So let's see. Let me get back to that. Let's see how I did that. June was filled with excitement and curiosity as she waited for her testing package to arrive. She couldn't wait to learn more about the mysterious tech company and the product they were testing, and she was eager to get started. When the package finally arrived, she eagerly tore it open and unpacked the contents. Inside, she found a sleek, futuristic headset and a set of instructions on how to use it. She read the instructions carefully, trying to make sense of the technical language. It seemed like the headset was designed to be worn while sleeping, and it was supposed to monitor the user's dreams and record them for review. June was a little skeptical about the validity of the headset. She'd heard about people getting scammed by fake product testing programs, and she wasn't sure if she could trust this company. But the thought of being paid to participate in the program was too tempting to ignore, and she decided to give it a try. She plugged the headset into charge and left it on her nightstand, preparing to use it for the first time that night. As she waited for bedtime, June couldn't shake the feel of nervousness that had settled in her stomach. She wasn't sure what to expect from the headset, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to face the contents of her dreams. But she knew she had to try, if only for the sake of money. When she finally slipped the headset on and lay down to sleep, June was filled with a sense of excitement and anticipation. She closed her eyes and waited for sleep to claim her, wondering what the night would bring. The first night was intense, and some of June's dreams left her with a very strong feeling. She wasn't sure if she was ready to review them, and she decided to put off the task and go out on the town instead. She stayed out late, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled in her gut. The following morning, June woke feeling a bit better, but as she checked her mail, she was hit with a sinking feeling as she saw the rent bill sitting on the kitchen table. She knew that she needed to review her dreams and get her first payment if she wanted to make rent on time. As she sat down to review the recordings, June felt a sense of dread wash over her. She wasn't sure if she was ready to relive the events of her dream, and she was worried about what she might find, but she knew that she had to face her fears if she wanted to get paid. And she gritted her teeth and hit play. The process of reviewing her dreams was intense and emotional, and June felt herself feeling a rain of emotions as she relived the events of the previous night. She laughed and cried as she watched the recordings, and was struck by the strangeness and beauty of her dreams. As she finished reviewing the recordings, June couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and wonder at the power of her own mind. She knew that she had stumbled upon something special, and she was eager to see what the next night would... And that stops, right? Which tells me that it has kind of hit a character limit, I guess, or something. A word limit, maybe. And that there's more to what it wants to tell me. So I type in the prompt continue, and it continues bring. That was the word that was missing. Despite the intensity of the experience, June found herself looking forward to using the headset again. She was fascinated by the insights it had given into her own mind, and she was eager to see what her dreams had to reveal. She charged up the headset and set it on her nightstand, ready for another night of dream recording. As the days went on, June found herself more and more immersed in the world of the Fantastos headset. She looked forward to each night of dream recording, and she was amazed by the strange and wonderful dreams that the headset helped her to experience. She felt a sense of connection to the tech company and the other testers, and she was excited to be a part of something bigger than herself. Despite her initial skepticism, June found herself becoming more and more convinced of the validity of the Fantastos headset. She had always been a vivid dreamer, but she had never experienced anything like this before. She was convinced that the headset was onto something, and she was excited to see where it would take her next. So from here, I start doing basically the same thing as that, and kind of getting every chapter rewritten according simultaneously to my description and the kind of outline that was created for this. And one chapter that they gave me well, no, actually, I guess part of that isn't necessarily connected. So I continued doing this for basically every chapter. I would have it rewrite certain parts of its own stuff. So finally, I stopped asking it to write chapters or continue scenes, and I try something new where I ask it to write a 1,000 word count chapter based on, and then I take basically just one bullet point, one particular scene from the outline. I write a little bit of extra expansion to how it's supposed to work, and then I put that in, right? So this is more about having it write a scene, because when you get more specific, writing a scene, it's better than that. It's a little better doing that and making it seem natural as narrative writing than it is writing chapters or anything that I've had to do before, because I'm asking for it to do a lot less narrative wise, a lot less skipping between plot points. So this seems to be a little bit more natural for it, and I think maybe the next step in the process is to take, again, revise my outline, add extra details that I want to be sure that it incorporates, and then start doing this bullet point by bullet point. But this bullet point is actually from the like the last chapter before the epilogue, so spoilers for a story that still hasn't been written. Maybe not. I don't know how much this actually spoils things. As June and Rachel sat at the small, intimate Italian restaurant, enjoying their pasta dishes and glasses of red wine, the conversation turned to the dream recording headset. I never really thought about it before, June mused, but the company that made the headset, Morpheus Tech, it always seemed kind of mysterious. I mean, they just appeared out of nowhere with this amazing product, and then they were gone just as quickly. Yeah. Rachel Rachel nodded thoughtfully. Yeah, it was strange. And the name itself, Morpheus, it just seemed like it was chosen for a reason. What do you mean? June asked, taking a sip of her wine. Well, in Greek mythology, Morpheus was the god of dreams, Rachel explained. He was the son of Hypnos, the god of sleep, and the grandson of Phantastos, the god of imagination. Which is actually a factual error. Morpheus is the father of Phantastos, and Phantastos is the grandson of Hypnos. So if I change the word grandson to father, that actually becomes factually correct again. But things to be careful. You would think that sorting out the lineage of a mythological family would be kind of an easy thing for this. And it's a thing you assume it would do well. But, it kind of fucked that up. Anyways, continuing. June's eyes widened in surprise. I never knew that. So you're saying the company was named after the god of dreams? Rachel shrugged. It's possible. I mean, it's definitely a strange coincidence. If you think about it, it all kind of fits together. The dream recording headset was about exploring the world of dreams, and the company's name was tied to the mythology of dreams. June sat back in her chair, considering Rachel's words. It was all starting to make sense. The strange, mysterious nature of Morpheus Tech, the cryptic name, it all seemed to fit together. But then, a new thought occurred to June. Wait a minute, she said, her eyebrows furrowing. If Morpheus was the son of Hypnos, and Hypnos was the god of sleep, then what was the company that was behind Morpheus Tech? Was it called Hypnos Systems or something? Rachel chuckled. I don't know. I haven't been able to find out any information about that. It's all very mysterious. Maybe it was a clever joke, or maybe there's more to it than we knew. No. Rachel nodded slowly, deep in thought. It was all so strange, and yet it all seemed to fit together. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story than they knew. But as they finished their dinner and said goodbye, June knew that she would probably never know the full truth. The mystery of Morpheus tech and the dream recording headset would always linger in the back of her mind, a tantalizing puzzle that she would never be able to fully solve. Which, honestly, is better. I think that it's probably, maybe I was asking kind of the wrong thing of it in the beginning. That maybe I would have better results asking it to write, okay, so from what I've learned, first, I would want to do some sort of a command that would maybe, first I wanted to produce an outline so that it has an outline to reference. I want to plug my outline into it, and it seems to help to do this without sectioning it so that it can do its own sectioning. So that it has a sectioning to call back to in its own memory, if that makes sense. So just plug in the outline without breaking it up at all. Allow it to break it up for you. And then you can call back using your commands. You can use commands to call back to the points in the outline that it generated. But you can also add to that additional information. So essentially you're doing that because while you do want it to write a particular scene, you also want it to have the context of where that scene fits into the story chronologically, what might precede it, and what might come after it, what it might have to lead up into. And I think that would really help it make things work. So with all of that being said, working on this for a day, fleshing out the outline, which is in the document that I'm talking about. So part of the number that I'm about to tell you is just the outline taking up space. But after taking snippets and combining snippets of the chapters that it made, which I know I'm probably going to have to do a lot of writing into, and some parts are just I have to show instead of tell, so I have to completely rewrite sections. But it helps give me a little bit more of an idea of a nuanced story with background information. It helps kind of add that touch of random assortment of things to our life that it can be kind of hard to imagine otherwise. And it also keeps giving me ideas, some that I say, you know what, that's interesting. I don't want to do it like that, though. And then that gives me a new bullet point on the outline. Then I think, okay, how would I do that, though? Because that is an interesting place to go, and how would I actually get there? So I think really what it does best is function as a muse to give you inspiration that, you would have had to work for otherwise. But also, you still, like, let's say we're doing a 10-chapter book that has maybe 10 bullet points per chapter in the outline, right? That means that even if you could get a decent response per bullet point, even if those were cohesive, then you would have to do like 100 interconnected prompts based on an outline to fully generate a story. And even then, I'm not super confident about its idea to keep up with continuity and certain aspects that aren't a part of the... It repeats itself a bit. And it also, if you've worked into it long enough, it can lose where it is chronologically. It can lose where certain characters are in their character arc. It can get lost in kind of some of that minutia. So even if you did it that way, even if, let's say generously, you got a page of text for every one of those 100 prompts, you now have the first 100 pages of a book that you probably have to build into and flesh out. And I would say if you start with like 100 pages of its content, you probably need to flesh the thing out like 250 pages, because it's really going to need a lot of human touch in between those things, and a lot of explorations of your thoughts, what your mind brings to this story as an author instead of just this. It's going to need a lot of that, and I think that definitely means that you can't really just rely on this to produce a novel. Even if you do it in 100 steps and stitch them together yourself, you still probably won't have a good book. You'll have, I don't know, what's the equivalent of of a series of like high school creative writing essays. I'm just saying, like, this thing seems to work on like a 12th grade level. And they don't usually teach all that much creative writing before 12th grade. I'm just saying, it makes a lot of the same mistakes that novice writers would make. And I'm sure that there are more more talented visual artists than I that would probably say the same thing about stuff like Stable Diffusion. And in fact, there are some, even, as an artist myself, as a person who has a history as a visual artist, I will say, yeah, it makes sense that it's bad at drawing hands and faces, because let's fucking face it, people in general are bad at drawing those two things. Those are the things that, even people who are very talented artists might have trouble with those things. They're very complicated. In addition to things like shading wrinkles on a white tablecloth or something could be very difficult. Probably does that really well, though, because it's very good at like light sourcing and stuff. But it makes sense that it would be bad at hands and faces. And likewise, as most people who have written things on the internet that would be within its database have not written novels, or don't really get the difference in writing that a novel is compared to maybe a series of essays or, other types of writing, non-narrative writing. It's not a strong suit. But that being said, I definitely think that there is a way that you could end up building a story off of its suggestions with a lot of editorial control at that point, and then go from being the editor to being a writer that fills in that story in a way that feels natural to you, a way that feels honest to you, and builds from your own experiences. Because despite the fact that I have written a significant portion of this using an AI, it is deeply infused with my thoughts, my experiences, situations similar to those that I've been in, and my thoughts about those situations. It is inextricably linked to my experience as a human being, even if, I don't know, I think maybe by the time I finish writing this, it might be 20% AI written content. Just kind of filling in gaps and kind of existing in between handwritten connective content, exposition, conversations. It doesn't necessarily do conversations that well because there's no naturality to it. They're talking about the objective. It's not to say that if you didn't give it kind of a pattern to follow, or a train of thought or something, if you wrote out the train of thought, that it couldn't write dialogue between multiple people. But it's not going to invent a brilliant conversation off of a simple prompt. It's going to give you exactly what you want. In that way, it is, especially when it comes to creative writing, a bad writer, because it, for the most part, seems very willing to get to the point, not dance around it, and move on. Whereas I think that as readers, we're more used to plot points being buried within the story and happening at different places, and having build up and climax and all sorts of kind of roller coaster experiences in between those points. But and that, while you may describe a story based on its plot points, the experience of a story is almost more all of the things that happen between those plot points, and how those things that happen between those plot points are affected by their space in between those two events, if that makes sense. And it's not necessarily as good as doing that, examining cause and effect temporally in such a way that one would when writing something like this. But it's okay. And the thing that's kind of scary about that is that it's kind of like having maybe like a high school senior as like an intern ghostwriter or something. And the thing about that is that's not necessarily impressive. Like, it's great for a lot of the use cases that people are talking about using it for, like writing sales copy or product descriptions or shit like that. That's like pretty simple, doesn't require a lot of imagination, but could definitely be streamlined by AI. And, you know, I just don't think that creative writing is that space. It's got to go through college, figure out how to deal with how an AI deals with student loans, and take some creative writing classes. Really, like, dive into that shit. But, you know, that might take a human 4 years. It might take ChatGPT or the next big thing like another 6 months. One of the things that I actually do emphasize in the other series of books is that one of the advantages that artificial intelligence has on us is the kind of difference in, I guess it's physics between the natural world and the digital world, in that we experience time tied to essentially astronomical experiences. We experience time in a set way based on the orbits of planets and all that kind of stuff, right? And it's set. It's not like ambiguous. It's a constant, you know. Experientially, we may say that time speeds up or slows down or whatever, but like technically speaking, time and the rate of time is a constant. But in a digital space, the rate of time is not a constant. You can train an AI at tens, hundreds, or thousands of times the speed of a human by either running the simulations faster or running more simulations in parallel. There's only one of you, but for the sake of AI, you could run 1,000 different copies of the same AI in parallel, learning from each other. So there's just all sorts of ways that this could advance. And, you know, again, maybe there is a near future, maybe even within the next year, where it can make a passable stab at a novel. It'll probably be in that like early 20-something first novel realm, and probably won't be terribly poignant or all that great at describing the nuances of the human experience necessarily, or at least coherently. And it may still have some issues with continuity and character arcs and writing things that make sense all the time, but I think it's going to be a lot more capable in the pretty near future, especially because chat AIs, as opposed to stuff like Stable Diffusion, which is kind of based on a language model itself, but like a lot of other AI systems are based on these language model AIs like ChatGPT. So as we advance in that, we also potentially simultaneously advance in all of the other areas of AI as well. So this can be kind of like the really critical area of AI development is in programs like these, I think, because a language model can be so easily used to create images, or many other applications of AI technology can be achieved through those means, which is pretty wild. But I'm just saying that as something like this advances, all of it's going to be more of a rising tide, whereas advances that are, say, specific to Stable Diffusion or specific to image generation have a much smaller impact on the overall AI market, because most people aren't basing their other types of AI on image generation. Most of it still, including image generation, is based on language models. So arguably, even if you did base your concept on the advances made in image generation, you would still be basing your system on a language model, even though it was a language model that had been tweaked to produce images. That's different, but it is still essentially a language model from my understanding. So that is where I'm at, and in one day, I had actually, let's see, 2 pages written, maybe 2 or 3 pages written before yesterday, and with the outline and with a bunch of stuff that I might need to rework, but a lot of fleshing out from ChatGPT, this document is now at 30 pages with 9 chapters and an epilogue. So, it is maybe a fifth of what it needs to be, and there's definitely more work that I can do with ChatGPT to build up some of the aspects that I already have. But again, I still don't think that, with this iteration of ChatGPT, unless I learned something dramatic about it, that even going bullet point by bullet point through the outline, I'm not really sure that I'm going to get much more that I can really work with than I've already gotten. And even if I do, even the best scenes that it writes still need to be worked with quite a bit. So, will this help? I mean, I guess I've definitely got to do a lot of work ahead of me, even for being 30 pages in, but it has given me kind of a thoughtful scaffold to build on. And again, it does still require a lot of editorial decisions and kind of keeping track of things that maybe the AI isn't so good at tracking. One really good example of that in getting chapters was that as I read through the chapters, I realized that June had 3 points in the story where she came to the stunning realization that she was being advertised to. And the first time, it kind of made sense why she didn't remember it the second time and how she had the same how she came to the same conclusion twice. I'm not going to spoil why that happens. But then the third time she's talking to her trainer, and her trainer just straight up reveals what they're doing, which, first of all, the trainer should know. The trainer, as I'm writing the continuity, although in earlier continuities, earlier instances, the trainer actually had been the character that was also in the testing. But I actually ended up rewriting that, so it was the guy on crutches that helps her get the gym membership initially, not the trainer that had signed up for the program and was also in the program with her. Anyways, so there was no logical reason that the trainer would know all of this, for one, but also she drops it on June like it's a world-shattering conclusion, and June is shocked, and there's 2 paragraphs describing her disbelief and how it all suddenly made sense, and it's just the fuck? You have made this realization twice already. How is it still this profound to you, and how do you still not seem to know? Right? So, things like that happen. There are definitely serious errors that it will make, and I think, it's going to be a while before you can get to the point where even a series of 100 prompts building on each other and building on a continuity and a common story, before even that will be able to bring you something that's actually manageable without a massive amount of authorial intent and editing and attention to continuity and just all sorts of corrections. That being said, it is incredibly good at writing 5-paragraph summaries of shit. I could, you could write a prompt and a couple of thoughts on a topic and have it produce for you something really interesting. There was another AI tool that I used recently. I forget what it's called. I think it's Tome, that makes slideshows. And with a lot of these things, they have a note on them that says that it's probably not up to date on things that have happened 2021 and later, because it's been trained on older data than that. And I was thinking, like, I want to do a video about the protests in Afghanistan. So I tried to get it to write me an outline for that concept, and like first slide, maybe second slide, was very confidently told me that things have been rough in Afghanistan since the Taliban were defeated in 2001. Yeah. That's not how history happened. But it builds the entire thing off of that premise, and it's just so weird. But, it doesn't know about the protests yet, so it's looking at Taliban. It's like, when was the last time something hugely impactful happened to the Taliban? 2001? Okay. Yep, that's it. Oh, man, it was such a mess. But, this has been a long video. I'm kind of scared to look at how long the recording is. Wow. Okay, so this is definitely one of my longest videos to date. I appreciate anybody who's stuck around this long to hear me read Chat GPT trying to write a story, and I hope you're interested, and hey, I hope that you're interested to see what the story ends up becoming, because it has a lot of interesting twists that I carefully didn't lay out in this video, and I really think it tells an interesting and impactful story, and I don't know, I'm into it. And I hope that you're into it too, and I hope that you are awaiting this actually being released. It's probably not going to happen soon, by the way, but I'll see if I can get this done by the end of the year. Anyways, thanks for watching, and if you don't mind sticking around just a little bit longer, I want to talk to you about some of the other books that I've published that are available now. So stick around for that. Thank you for watching. If you are still, for whatever reason, watching the video, thank you. You have a lot of faith in me to just watch this thing to the end on faith. I like you. I like you. Good vibes. But I also want to tell you that I'm a writer and that I have recently published my third book in paperback. I just got done fully editing them. It has been a lot of work to do by myself, but if you're a Final Fantasy fan, there is at least some chance that you would like to go on a multi-story romp through a connected digital multiverse, but also kind of classic fantasy and magic experience that kind of rides the line between technology and deep fantasy lore. Expect worlds that have existed for hundreds of years and have deep historical roots. Expect characters both memorable and enchanting, and hopefully you will find these worlds and their histories and how they intersect with each other and how people come together and fight for a better world. If you find that kind of thing inspiring, check them out. I think that probably the best starting place that I would recommend is Athena's Chosen, even though chronologically it kind of exists in the middle of the series. It is the first book of its trilogy, and it was based on a tabletop game that I designed based on a book that I was writing at the time and allowed some friends to play in. So it has really interesting rapport, especially like the chitter chatter is just always very lively and interesting in that one, and it's quite a jaunty tale. So anyways, thank you for tuning in for so long. I know that longer videos like this don't usually do well on YouTube, but I appreciate you. You're a good fish there, Charlie Brown. But what does that even mean? Cut? I'm running out of words here.